I would like to call to order on August 30th. The time is 5:30 p.m. The public hearing for the City of Tampa Historic Preservation Commission. Welcome, everyone. I am Dominique Cobb, the Vice Chair, Historic Preservation, and I would like to introduce introduce the commission.
My name is Carrie Ann Canch.
Missy Shoecraft.
And also, if you are here to present a request, please bring it, I'm sorry. If you're here to present a request, please be thorough and concise at the microphone. Identify yourself and your relationship to the project before beginning your presentation. The commissioners will not ask any questions during the presentation at the time. All right, at this time, we're going to go through the reading of the minutes from June 14th, 2022.
I make a motion to approve.
Commissioners, by the showing of, by saying aye if you agree.
Aye.
Aye.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager. Next on the agenda, we'll have the disclosure of conflicts of interest or ex parte communication, and our legal counsel will lead that discussion.
Good evening, Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. Will the Commissioners please state whether or not they've had any ex parte communications regarding any of the items regarding the item that's listed on the agenda?
None.
Additionally, will the Commissioners please state for the record whether or not they have any conflicts of interest regarding the item that's on the agenda?
None.
Thank you.
At this time, we're going to do the swearing in. If there is anyone here to present, and if you have asked for additional time, if you can please turn that into legal so that that can be done.
If you are going to be presenting or giving any type of public comment, please stand and raise your right hand for the swearing.
Will you be speaking? If you could please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you will be giving today at this public hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. May be seated.
Thank you, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager. I'll be leading the presentation on your agenda item this evening. I did want to introduce some of the staff members here that'll be contributing to the discussion and the process. I do have Lane Lund, the Historic Preservation Specialist, who will be assisting me this evening and was responsible for many of the documents that you're going to be reviewing. Ron Vila with the staff is assisting the attendees as they arrive outside. I have Minta Owen, who has been serving in various positions for the last couple months, who's assisting us today, serving as our clerk. And then I did want to introduce Alexis Guzman, our newest staff member, who's also assisting with the record this evening, and will be joining us permanently in place of Beverly Jusak, who moved on to another position. So I want to thank the staff and, of course, our legal counsel as well for their efforts for this evening's hearing. The item before you is a request to expand the Hyde Park Local Historic District boundaries from the existing boundaries to an expanded boundary area. First, I wanted to begin by apologizing for having to take another shot at this hearing. We had a procedural error back in April that we identified, and erring on the side of caution and for inclusiveness with our attendees, we wanted to ensure that everybody had an opportunity to participate, so we are holding the hearing again. It has been noticed in accordance with 27-149, and we are in receipt of all the notice documents affirming the notice was completed correctly. I'm going to go ahead and begin with a PowerPoint presentation, following some comments by the applicants this evening. So the applicants in this request are the Hyde Park Preservation Neighborhood Association and the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association, and they will be opening the hearing to present the nature of their request and some specific facts. And
And
their
I-
agent's going to be attending, is going to be presenting first.
Okay. Also, at this time, if you have your phone on, if you can please put it on silence for the respect of the presenters. Thank you.
Do I need to turn it on? Oh, thank you. Okay. Good evening, I'm Pamela Jo Hatley. My address is 14517 North 18th Street, Tampa. I'm an attorney and I represent the applicants, the Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association and the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association. The applicants are requesting an expansion of the Hyde Park Historic District boundaries. And this map shows generally where the boundaries are proposed to be expanded, south and east of the Selman Expressway, north of De Leon, west of Boulevard and along Platte, between Hyde Park Avenue and Boulevard. So those are the proposed expansion, that's the proposed expansion area. The applicants have been working with the city staff for actually several years to bring this application to you tonight. And there has been extensive outreach in the community. The applicants have held several community meetings. The latest one was just this month, August 10th. There were about 30 people from the public who attended that meeting. The city staff was there and presented the proposal and answered questions of the public. We mailed out, for this meeting tonight, we mailed out 656 public notice letters. And we mailed them to an area that was 275 feet surrounding the proposed expansion area, which is more than the city requires. The code requires 250 feet, so we exceeded that. We posted 12 public notice signs in the expansion area and around the proposed boundary. And we submitted our affidavit of compliance timely. So we've gone above and beyond the city's requirements for public notice of this meeting tonight. There will probably be many members of the public who wish to speak to you tonight. Many will be in support of this proposal. Some will be in opposition of this proposal, and the commission will hear from the public as it should. The applicants will have 4 speakers. After myself, we'll have 4 speakers, and we will present to you competent substantial evidence showing that the proposed expansion area meets or exceeds the city's criteria for designation of an area as a historic district. In addition, the city staff has reviewed this proposal and has recommended that this proposal meets the city's requirements and has recommended approval of the proposed expansion area. So at this time, I would like to introduce our first 2 speakers who are experts, and I would like to present into the record, submit into the record, their credentials. The first speaker will be Mr. Rodney Kite Powell. Mr. Rodney Kite Powell has bachelor's and master's degrees in history. He's an expert in Tampa history with extensive work experience and many publications. He's currently the director of the Touchton Map Library and the Florida Center for Cartographic Education at the Tampa Bay History Center. He is the curator of history for the Saunders Foundation. Our second speaker tonight will be Mr. Roger Grunke. Mr. Grunke has a bachelor's degree in architecture. He's a licensed architect in the state of Florida. Mr. Grunke has extensive experience in architecture. He has numerous publications and many awards, and he is an expert in historic preservation. Our third speaker will be Mr. Cam Potter, who is a resident of the proposed expansion area, and he serves on the board of the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association. And finally, our fourth speaker will be Dr. Pat Cimino, who is a resident of the Hyde Park Historic District, and he serves on the board of the Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association. So I would like to call Mr. Kite Powell to the speaker stand and submit these credentials into the record. Who shall I give these to? Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and speak on behalf of the expansion of the Hyde Park Historic District. My name is Rodney Kite Powell. My address is 3714 West Santiago Street here in Tampa. And just going to give you just a little history lesson. I'm sure you all know a lot of the history of Hyde Park. You're going to have a great presentation about the expansion area. And of course, you've read the report. But just wanted to highlight some details specifically about the history of Hyde Park, particularly the expansion area. Hyde Park really has three histories. There is its frontier history, there is its rural agricultural history, and then its history as a suburb of the city of Tampa. And there's likely a fourth history, that of a pre-Columbian native history, but honestly, nothing's really been found to talk too much to that. So that's not being touched on here, nor is it being addressed in the criteria for historic preservation. But that frontier history is where Hyde Park gets its start, and that is around the same time that Fort Brooke got its start in the 1820s here in Tampa. The Collar family settled on the west side of the river, opposite the fort. They attempted to homestead the area, but they actually were too late, and so they weren't able to officially homestead that space. But one of Levi Collar's daughters, Nancy Jackson, did in fact homestead some of that property with her husband, Robert Jackson, who was a doctor at Fort Brooke. And so it was the Jackson family that was the first kind of first American family to live in what we now know as Hyde Park. Others joined them beginning in the 1850s and 60s, although there was another element, the Spanish Town settlement of Cuban and indigenous fishermen, that has kind of a amorphous history a little bit. It may have gone back as far as the 1700s, may actually date from the 1820s and 30s. But they were their own kind of settlement along the creek, where the creek emptied into Hillsborough Bay right around Swan and Bay Street. But other settlers, particularly American settlers, began to move in next to the Jacksons, particularly the Washingtons, the Wattresses, the Morrisons, the Haydens, the Collinses, the Kellys. And they all had 40-acre or more tracts of land where they all farmed, mostly citrus, although there's some indication that particularly Mr. Watrous grew all kinds of things, cucumbers, onions, just that kind of stuff, general produce, all for, of course, the neighborhood's consumption, but also for a sale across the river in the growing town of Tampa. Then as that growing town of Tampa began to grow even more, you had more people moving in to the west side of the river. But it really wasn't until the construction of what was then the Lafayette Street Bridge, now the Kennedy Boulevard Bridge, that development was really able to be sparked on the west side of the river. But just prior to that, in actual anticipation of that, a man not from Chicago, actually born in Saratoga, New York, but who was living in Chicago, particularly the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago, Obadiah H. Platt, came to Tampa. It was in the 1870s, bought 20 acres of Nancy Jackson's property, and created the plat of Hyde Park. And so actually, a couple of things to show you guys. This is actually the Jackson family. Nancy Jackson's there in the middle. This house is unfortunately gone, and it actually is just outside of the proposed expansion area. This is at 205 Platt Street, just on the east side of Plant Avenue, on the site of where Fort Greene Fields was. Not the same building, but that exact address, 205. But it was the Jackson family that owned a really tremendous amount of land, all the waterfronts along Hyde Park. But then when Mr. Platt purchased that property, he created, this is the plat on this side, Hyde Park. And it's really interesting to note that that entire neighborhood, what we think of as pretty much everything south of Kennedy and east of Howard Avenue along the Bay Shore, is all Hyde Park. But it got its start from that plat that you see on the right. One strip of land, 20 acres or so in size along Hyde Park Avenue. But the eastern side of the expansion area, proposed expansion area, is actually on this plat. It's right here at Platt Street, named after Mr. Platt, and Hyde Park Avenue, right in that corner. And so it was never included in the original district for Hyde Park, the local district. And so it's good that perhaps that can finally be corrected. So as the city began to grow and as the bridges began to be constructed, you had the suburban history of Hyde Park. The growth in the number of people living there, the diversity of architecture, and really a population boom, to the point where by the 1920s and 26 particularly, when the Platte Street Bridge opened, you had almost a city within a city. And so not only did you have a residential neighborhood, but you also had commercial structures, churches, schools, really everything that the neighborhood needed to function, as well as provide other services for the larger city of Tampa. And so this is also within the proposed expansion area, one of the best named buildings around, that we don't call it that anymore, but this is actually, it's called the Platonian Building, and that's on the northeast corner of Boulevard and Platte Street. Still very much intact and similar to the way it looked back then. And it's those kind of structures, again, the combination of commercial and residential and even multifamily, that made Hyde Park a really budding and growing area. But it also has another element, and that leads to even kind of more of the story of diversity. And that is really what's in a section of the larger part of the proposed expansion area, and that's Dobyville. The Dobyville neighborhood is something that unfortunately has not been that well known until recently. But the Dobyville neighborhood was a very important part of Hyde Park's history. It's, as you can see from this map, it's in the northwestern section of what we think of as Hyde Park, but it was really almost kind of in the center, or just to the west of center of historic Hyde Park. We think about Kennedy Boulevard being this big dividing line, but it really wasn't as much when it was Grand Central and it was a smaller road. Hyde Park and, by extension, Dobyville crossed over Grand Central and extended all the way up to the city limits at Fig that separated Tampa and West Tampa. And Dobyville, as an African-American neighborhood founded by, among others, Richard Doby, was a really vibrant neighborhood. Again, it wasn't just homes. It also had churches. It had businesses. It had a school, Dobyville School. And it was a really important neighborhood as far as the vibrancy of the city of Tampa. A lot of the folks who lived in Dobyville worked in the homes in Hyde Park, though not all of them. Others had more what we can kind of consider middle-class jobs as well. But Dobyville, unfortunately, is almost entirely gone, although there is a nice concentration of what would be contributing structures within the proposed expansion area. So, let me get a few more shots of Dobyville here. It is hard to find photographs of Dobyville, which is not surprising given the times in which the Berger brothers were active. But this is the corner of Platte and Oregon where the railroad tracks cross. I think this is looking to the north, although sometimes the descriptions are a little bit off. But this is a very typical look of what the structures in Dobyville look like. And again, Roger will tell you about the architecture of Hyde Park in general in this area specifically. But it looks different. It is different, particularly the Dobyville section. It's more modest, and that's just the nature of the folks that were living there. But it's a wonderful example of that section of Hyde Park. And then this picture is, again, lots of favorite pictures of our history, but this is one of my favorites. These are students at the Dobyville School, just outside the school. The school was located on near the corner of Platte and Willow, about where the crosstown, the Leavenworth-Selma Expressway comes through. And the school was considered overcrowded, and there was a consideration of actually having the students go to the Dunbar School as early as the 1940s, but it actually survived through the mid-1960s, even though the kitchen, which is a separate structure, had been condemned by the city. And so it definitely, again, another example of kind of separate but unequal in the era of segregation. So Hyde Park, after World War II, went through an era of decline, and that stretched most of the neighborhood. But by the late 1970s and early 1980s, people began to take a great interest in preserving Hyde Park, but particularly the area of Hyde Park south of Swan. And so a lot of things were put into place, a lot of money was spent, and also historic preservation was looked to as one of the factors that could help save Hyde Park. And so the national and local districts were created the way that they were and the way you're seeing them today. It is, in my opinion, a kind of a miscarriage that these areas were not included originally. We lost a lot of fabric because of that, but I know there were a variety of factors, economic, practical, and even cultural reasons that the limits are the way they are. But tonight we have an opportunity to fix that, and I hope that is taken care of. So As you all know, you have to look at criteria, you have to look at facts, and so 3 of the 4 criteria that Secretary of Interior standards look at qualify this proposed expansion area for inclusion in the Hyde Park Historic District, the local historic district. So 1, associated with events that have made significant contribution to the broad pattern of our history. And of course, as I mentioned, that would be suburban growth, support of a growing city, the city of Tampa, African-American history, the history of segregation, and the overall social history for the city of Tampa. B, associated with lives of people significant in our past. And that, again, it's the people I mentioned, the Jackson family, Obadiah Platt, Richard Doby, and many others who contributed to the history of this particular section of Hyde Park. As well as embodying the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, represents the work of a master, possesses high artistic values, represents a significant, distinguishable entity whose components lack individual distinction. And this just reinforces what is already in the existing Hyde Park Historic District, but again, it adds another layer of that, more of a commercial look, because most of what's being preserved in the local district is residential, and there is definitely a commercial aspect of Hyde Park, as well as the more modest homes that you see north of Swan and north of De Leon as you go further and further north to Platt Street. And again, I will say, while everything I said is, of course, historic and accurate, I do want to add a slight personal bent to the last part, but it too is historic and accurate. From 2000 to 2006, I sat up there. I was a member of the Historic Preservation Commission. This neighborhood, not quite in the same format, but basically was brought to us to expand the Hyde Park District, and we failed to do so. And the history of Dobyville was not known nearly as well at that point, and there was other information that was less emphasized. And so the board decided not to expand, and I have regretted that pretty much ever since. And so you all have a chance to fix what I could not do. And so I appreciate your all's support, and hope you all vote to expand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so the staff report, which you all have.
If you can just give me your name and address.
Yes, of course, I'm sorry. My name is Roger Grunke, architect. I live at 2708 North Elmore Avenue in Tampa Heights. The staff report, which you all have, supports the annexation of this area, the proposed area, to the Hyde Park Historic District. Mr. Kite Powell had talked about the history of Tampa. I want to talk to you about the same thing through the eyes of an architect, a historic architect. I will repeat a little bit of the history, only a little bit, so that you can understand why I think this proposed annexation is so important. It's sort of like baking a cake. It's not just the flour. It's the nuts and the sugar and the baking powder, everything that has to go together and come together at one time to make something happen. That happened at the end of the 19th century in Hyde Park in Tampa. After decades of Tampa going through no growth and even losing its city charter because of the decline in population. So all of a sudden here was a turnaround. In 1884 actually, January of 1884, Plant's Railroad reached Tampa, and Tampa was connected to the east coast of Florida. That allowed produce, cattle, to be shipped from this area to the markets in the north. In 1886, Platt O.H. Platt purchased the 20 acres from the Collier-Jackson family west of the river. 2 years later, in 1888, the Lafayette Street Bridge made that land valuable because now it was accessible, easily and practically accessible. So this created a completely different situation for that area. And then in 1891, the most spectacular thing happened to Tampa, and that was the opening of the Tampa Bay Hotel, which was at the time the most elegant and ostentatious venue that Tampa had ever seen. It brought people from all over the country to Tampa for the first time. We know that the proposed area qualifies in terms of notable persons: the Watrous family, O'Knight family, Anderson, McFarland, Morrison. Overwhelmingly, Tampa's leading families relocated into Hyde Park as soon as the development allowed. People also came to live in Hyde Park because it was close to the hotel and they wanted to participate in the amenities that the hotel had to offer. Okay, so just quickly, here are some of our historic houses. The top is the Morrison House. I'm sorry? You want one photo at a time. Okay. Yes, please. Thank you very much. And this is the Collier House. This is the well-known Lyman House. Lyman produced the boxes for the cigars in Ybor City. This is the Anderson House on Plant Avenue, and on Hyde Park Avenue, the Tolliver House, which is now the Center for Women. On Morrison Avenue, the Watrous House. The Watrous family actually lived in a log cabin, albeit a log cabin that had a pipe organ in it, but nonetheless, they were homesteaders in Hyde Park before any platting had been done. I don't know who Selwyn was, but he had built quite a magnificent home here on Hyde Park Avenue, and it's important to include this because you can see none of these homes that I've shown you so far are bungalows. Hyde Park predates the Craftsman bungalow period. The beginning of Hyde Park occurred during the High Victorian period. This is the McFarland House. I think this house was lost to the crosstown, the Selman Expressway. Now this is my favorite and most important. Can we zoom in on this? Yeah? Great, thank you so much. Okay, so why is this to me so important? This is a photograph taken out of a window or from a parapet of the Tampa Bay Hotel, looking across the street, across Lafayette, which is Kennedy Boulevard today, looking all the way down to the bay, Hillsborough Bay, and to the left you can see where the mouth of the river meets the bay. Okay, so this proves that in 1891, Hyde Park started at what is today Kennedy, went south to Hillsborough Bay, started on the east at Hillsborough River, and went all the way west to the railroad tracks, and then on the southwest side to what is now Howard Avenue. So, the fact that the homes in this photograph have largely disappeared does not diminish the importance of this area as a historic site. Quickly, I would like to show you an example of the importance of place. This is the city palace, the Kaiser's Palace in Berlin in 1900. This is the same building in 1945 after the Allies bombed Berlin. And the building, the palace, was nothing more than a shell remaining. The palace found itself eventually in the segment of the city, once divided, occupied by the Russians. It became part of the GDR, the East German government. And the socialist government did not see the importance of a monarch's palace in their culture, so they opted to implode the ruins of the Kaiser's Palace and replace it with what they called the People's Palace. Well, after the reunification of Germany in 1989, people began to think as well, nobody is using the People's Palace as the East German government is no longer in existence. What if we reinstated, rebuilt the palace that was bombed and then later totally destroyed? So they put up a scaffolding with canvas and gave the population a look, a first-hand look of how that palace would affect the spaces around the area in their downtown area. Not only was, of course, there was some opposition, but not only was there overwhelming support for it, but while the taxpayers paid for the construction of the structure itself, all the decoration on the outside was paid for by private funds raised for this, donated for this purpose. My point is to you that you can destroy something completely. That does not eradicate the importance of what historically took place on that site. And indeed, we can see that buildings can be rebuilt. Here's this picture is of laying the foundation of the new building, and here is the building completed today. Just one point, though, I'd like to share with you is that and this was very, very important to the German people, so that people did not think this was an original building. They only reconstructed 3 sides in the original design. The rear side on the river has a modern design intentionally, so that they're saying this is a reconstruction. But the importance of it is to commemorate the site. Today, this building is not a palace. It's a museum, it's a Congress hall, it serves modern purpose. But the history of the site is commemorated. In the United States, the Park Department the U.S. Parks Department was developing the home site of Benjamin Franklin. This is let's see here. This one, okay. Thank you. This is a photograph of the so-called ghost house. The Parks Department, Franklin's home was destroyed in 1812. the Parks Department decided it was not important to rebuild his home, because it was Franklin's thoughts, his ideas, his writings, not his house, that was important. But he did those writings, those thoughts. He lived on this site, and for that reason, they constructed the steel skeleton of his home, commemorating the place. And so, back to Hyde Park. The fact that so much has been lost in this area due to the construction of the Selman Expressway, in my opinion, doesn't matter. There still are many, many wonderful. This is the Oneida Cottage. I just walked down Platt Street and down the little side dead-end streets between Platt Street and the Selman, and there's a myriad of wonderful architectural gems. And on and on. I don't need to show them all to you to get my point across that if you go down those little side streets north of Platt Street, you will find what composed this photograph. They're not the great houses that we know, like the Lyman House or the Anderson House. The houses that remain north of Platt Street are simple Victorian homes, usually 2 stories, with a good deal of architectural definition. And even though they're not in the best of shape, I remember Hyde Park in 1980, and Newport Avenue was not in the best of shape. My friend had difficulty obtaining a $75,000 mortgage for a beautiful 4-square on Newport, which today is worth millions of dollars. So neighborhoods can be resurrected, and there is no reason why these little Victorians should not be included in the overall Hyde Park district. They complete the story. They were the beginning. The large houses were sort of the middle of the story. And if you want the whole story, you have to include these, as well as out to the west of Hyde Park, Dobyville. So here is another aspect of the importance, and that is urban design. Many of the structures come right up to the sidewalk. These are all on Platt Street. Why is this important? Because if this neighborhood is not recognized and included in the historic district, it will have to follow, any new development on Platt Street will have to follow the current FDOT and City of Tampa setbacks, which do not align with the old setbacks of the historic neighborhood. The buildings close to the street, right on the sidewalk, were there because In the United States, the mass ownership of automobiles, where 60% of the families owned an automobile, didn't occur until 1929. We're talking 19 teens when Hyde Park, Platt Street, was developed. Today, the average is one vehicle per person of driving age, and there are more vehicles than there are people with driving licenses. Now, we have a problem in Tampa. Everybody is aware of our mobility problem. We can't widen the interstates fast enough. When we try to, they encroach upon neighborhoods. People don't want their neighborhoods destroyed. This Hyde Park district provides the people of Tampa with a perfect experimental stage for mobility study, density and mobility that would be something other than simply the private automobile. Hyde Park Village has pulled all of its buildings, now I believe they had to, that was part of the agreement, to the sidewalk. When the buildings are close to the sidewalk and the sidewalks are filled with people and the streets are narrow, the automobile traffic is slow, and you have what is simply called community. You have an area where people can go out comfortably, do their shopping, whatever, enjoy, socialize. This is another important aspect of why we must include this old structure into the annexation or annex it to the existing Hyde Park district. Last, perhaps the most important aspect of the proposed annex is the recognition of Dobyville, Hyde Park's African-American sub-neighborhood. While it is distinctly different from the rest of historic Hyde Park, it is no less important. Dobyville is a testament to the a testament to the history of race relations in the U.S. and Tampa. In particular, and for this reason deserves historic recognition. The fact that the majority of the historic buildings have been badly modernized should not disqualify them from being recognized. The design guidelines would prevent further damage to the historic fabric and architectural fabric, and even give the option for enlightened persons to buy and restore the tiny bungalows. In an age of tiny homes, the bungalows of Dobyville are comparatively not so small. In addition, Dobyville is enviously situated in the greater Hyde Park neighborhood. These factors, along with the protection that annexation would provide, give hope for proper rehabilitation, as well as an opportunity for the entire city to mature in terms of its social perspectives. So, while Hyde Park is known by everybody in Tampa as the place where the big houses are, what is equally important are these really old houses, the Victorian houses, north of Platt, and this wonderful little remnant of Dobyville, which is on the west. I ask you all, please consider positively this annexation request.
Thank you.
All these, okay? This as well?
Also, a reminder to please state your name and address. Thank you.
Yes, hello. My name is Cam Potter, and I'm a board member and treasurer of the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association. I'm speaking on behalf of the association as co-applicant. I live at 407 South Newport Avenue in the proposed expansion area. I want to thank the commission for their time this evening and the review of our application. So I brought some photos to try to.
Did I give those to you?
No, you didn't.
Did I give those to you?
We have photos that I wanted to include as visuals to help give you an idea of what the neighborhood looks like today. I am not a historic preservation expert, but I am an expert in the neighborhood, and I'm an expert in the experience of living in the neighborhood.
We need to zoom out.
Yeah, that's fine. We can just go
This
through
one?
them.
Is it this one? That's focus. I messed it up now. Oh, that one, okay. I messed up the focus.
Oh,
Okay.
good. So when my wife and I were looking for our first house together 28 years ago, we were attracted to the historic charm and location of Hyde Park neighborhood. The bungalow houses with broad pillared front porches, the live oaks, the alleyways, and the sidewalks. Walking through the neighborhood gives you a sense of what it was like strolling down the street 100 years ago. We felt it had character that epitomized the charm of historic Tampa. We bought a house knowing that our future home owning experience included repairs, replacements, updates, and renovations. We realized we weren't getting much closet space or problem-free plumbing or even up-to-code wiring. But we bought the house because the neighborhood had style, character, and charm that was authentic. Over time, we learned more about our neighborhood. Like the first European settlement was in our neighborhood, a Spanish fishing camp near a local creek, now named Spanish Town Creek, and that at the turn of the 19th century, in a segregated Tampa, there was a thriving African-American neighborhood named Dobyville, with its own historic style and charm. Over the years, we raised 2 children who went to Gorey Elementary, Wilson Middle School, and Plant High School. We got to know our neighbors, and every family we met who moved to the neighborhood moved there because of the historic charm. Some said the historic character of the neighborhood was the reason why they decided to make Tampa their home. To me, this shows the impact this historic place has made on Tampa as a whole and made it more desirable as a place to live. However, we also saw a gradual change in the neighborhood with building of more contemporary structures. Many new buildings were multifamily, and most of them were not consistent with the look of the rest of the neighborhood. On my street, South Newport, and on the adjacent streets of Delaware and Edison, most of the block is zoned RM24, multifamily residential. My concern is that the housing market pressures will drive more investors to buy contributing structures to tear down and build multifamily housing. It's obvious why people would want to live in the neighborhood because of the location and the charm. However, I feel that this increasing development and the lack of adherence to an overall historic look, is impacting the neighborhood and is changing the place to be in a position where it will no longer be popular. The reason why the new building is being built is no longer there. Recently, I've seen more single-family homes, some contributing structures, have been demolished to make way for new construction. I understand that since April this year, there have been at least 3 applications made for demolition within the requested expansion area. Having lived in this neighborhood for almost 30 years, seeing this trend coupled by raising home prices and housing demand, I've come to the conclusion, and I'm convinced, that the only way to preserve the historic character of this place is to include it in the local historic district. It would be a shame to lose the character of this neighborhood And I think that Tampa would lose some of its appeal as a community. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Chimino. I live at 604 South Oregon Avenue. I'm president of Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, and I'm going to give a brief statement on behalf of our neighborhood association and read a letter from Mary Lou Bailey, who's the current president of Hyde Park Preservation, Inc. I do want to thank the commission here and the staff, because there's been a lot of effort put. This has been going on for years. We've talked a little bit about that already, going on since the 80s. Time is of the essence, and as people have pointed out very eloquently, we really need to take the interest in preserving Dobyville. This area is recognized by people for its distinctiveness, and it's because we have such preservation and intactness of the neighborhood. HHP&A just had its 20th annual home tour, and we had 900 people go through our houses. My house happened to be one, and this is a before picture of my house when I bought it 6 years ago, and this is an after picture after renovation, and this is with my grandmother's amaryllis in front of it. We've had a lot of meetings. There's been support. There has been opposition, and I wanted to emphasize a few of the misconceptions about expanding the district. Just to reemphasize, it doesn't change existing land use and zoning. There is latitude for non-contributing structures and redevelopment. We see that happening. I'm going to give some examples. And I think a very successful residential realtor, Linda Aiken, who's here tonight, she did some analysis and found that there's a 29% premium per square foot for residential parcels in Hyde Park compared to other South Tampa neighborhoods like New Suburb. And she also presented some compelling documentation that includes commercial buildings as well. Not necessarily for Tampa, but in general, in an academic sense. I think it's notable that our neighborhood, because there's been a lot of concerns raised by businesses, it is heavily populated by businesses. There are, just between Boulevard and Hyde Park Avenue on Azeel, there's 12 contributing structures occupied by businesses that are well maintained, and I assume these businesses are successful. There's a distinctive renovation, and I'm going to mention some numbers, at the corner of Bay and Magnolia. It was a former medical office building. Somebody paid almost $500 a square foot and is renovating that building in the historic district. Probably nearly $300 to $500, I'm guessing, given the amount of stuff. So somehow investors see value in the historic district for businesses. They see a lot of value. There's also a new structure going up, which on the corner in Hyde Park, right adjacent to Hyde Park Village, which again is in the historic district, and it's been tried to be made as compatible as possible. We see a great deal of redevelopment on Howard Avenue. A lot of that is business and commercial, much needed. So we welcome, the commercial is an important part of our neighborhood. Those of us who are homeowners value our single family homes, but we appreciate the fact that we have commercial, including the Village, which has finally flourished. It's important to note that these adjacent areas, they have benefited from the historic district. They may not be in it, but people don't come to Hyde Park to look at a block condominium or townhomes. They come to see our historic streets and the quaint houses and stuff like that. And we really need to include the area to maintain the integrity and maintain we are a neighborhood. It isn't fair to say neighborhoods. We're a neighborhood. So once again, I think that was, I must be running out of time. And I'm the last one, so you all can cut me off. I think that there's been a lot of diligence and effort put into this, much by the commission, because you all looked at it and asked for more information, and the staff has done an excellent job, and I appreciate the work they've done, and I really encourage you to propose this expansion to City Council, and thank you for your attention. I didn't, this has already been submitted in the record. This is Mary Lou's Bailey's statement, but basically, I'll read the last part. Having reviewed the assessment from the city staff, we concluded this area is important to protect from further deterioration since the original local district protections were established in 1988. Thank you for serving on the Historic Preservation and help us protect this special area. Thank you.
That's the applicant's presentation. I'm Pamela Jo Hatley for the applicants, and I just wanted to state on the record that I'm submitting all of the photographs and documents we displayed. I'm submitting those into the record. Thank you.
We'll do it.
We have a motion to receive and file all the documents that were presented by the applicant.
Right, at this time, we have a motion from the commission.
Elaine?
I move to accept the documents that have been submitted.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
Once again, good evening, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager, here to present you the staff report and draft designation report and a general discussion of the merits of the application that are both before you from both organizations that you heard from this evening. A couple key documents that you have in your packet. You have the staff report, which is, I believe, 4 pages of staff assessment, actually 3. And then you have a more illustrated designation report, which includes references to the existing district, but mainly focuses on the expanded area that we're considering this evening. I want to go ahead and go through a PowerPoint to kind of walk us through the area and the criteria that you're going to be considering this evening. And if I could ask Elaine to go ahead and place the larger map on the easel. I'll have to block some of your views for a little while, but I think it's important for you to be able to see that. On your screens, you see a map of the existing Hyde Park Historic District. This includes illustration of both the National Register Historic District, which was listed in 1985, and it's indicated with the blue boundary line. And then 3 years later, a Hyde Park Local Historic District was established by the City of Tampa, and that is indicated in the red boundary line. I think you're familiar with many of these maps. They're very similar throughout the districts. Elaine? Just one technical issue we're having, just want to clarify something. I'll go ahead and continue on while they're working that out. These boundaries both are relevant for this evening's discussion. You'll see particularly the northern boundary of the Hyde Park Local Historic District is situated primarily on De Leon, and then steps up at Boulevard to Platt Street and extends east towards Bayshore Boulevard. The two types of designation differ greatly in what their goals are. National Register designations are essentially approved and implemented through the Department of the Interior. It's a federal designation that brings distinction to areas, sites, landmarks, and districts in many cases. The protections are generally embedded within federal funding requirements. So an example that we experience within the city of Tampa is when a interstate system expands within the boundaries of a historic district, there may be mitigation that occurs because of the impacts to the historic resources. So. Okay, that's all I needed to know. Okay, thank you. Local historic designation is a municipal ordinance mechanism that's placed in an area, a site, an individual property, or an archaeological site that brings protection to historic resources. And I think the most dramatic example of that is protection from demolition. But there's also protection from irrelevance through insensitive architectural modifications to a building that may adversely affect its integrity. The architecture review process is delineated within Chapter 27 of the zoning code. In the city of Tampa, we have 2 architectural review commissions. One is regarded as the Architecture Review Commission, and the other with jurisdiction over the Ybor City Local Historic District is the Barrio Latino Commission. So the code defines a local historic district as a significant concentration, linkage, or continuity of sites, buildings, structures, or objects united historically or aesthetically by plan or physical development. So really what we're looking at is a grouping, usually of 3 or more, into hundreds or thousands even, of structures that are related architecturally through a period of development or historically or culturally. This often occurs within our situation through this in Tampa as the original neighborhoods, which often meet the criteria that is specified within the code. And what the district does is seeks to protect the significant properties and historic character and encourage sensitive development through the architecture review process. So in addition to preserving structures that are significant, or as we refer to, contributing structures, those that are built within a period of significance for a particular area and still demonstrate their historic characteristics. It also seeks to maintain the character of the district through ensuring that infill construction is of a similar character, not stylistically, but in massing, scale, and detailing, site placement, orientation, and form. That occurs in many different approaches throughout the historic districts, and the Architecture Review Commission has meetings, as many of you know, monthly to determine that type of adherence to their guidelines. One important point that is often misunderstood is that the architecture review process and local historic designation only applies to the exterior properties. The interior properties are not regulated or reviewed, only in the event that a contributing structure wishes to seek some type of preservation incentive. The local Hyde Park Historic District's period of significance is from 1886 to 1933. I think we heard quite a bit of testimony today why that period begins at 1886. The 1933 is a little bit more related to when the district was established as a National Register district. Typically, when those periods are defined, it's 50 years prior to the establishment date for National Register. So, you know, we're looking at 1933 in this particular case. Sometimes there are properties that kind of ride that latter border, and we've used individual landmarking to try to accommodate those properties that may kind of bridge that end period date. Within the Hyde Park Local Historic District, there are currently 834 contributing structures and 433 non-contributing structures. So there's a total of 1,267 structures. We're going to come back to sort of a data analysis a little later, but that's a rather robust historic district, and it's one that is well known, obviously, throughout our city, but also in our state and nationally. Some of the benefits of local historic designation, and I think that's what really drives neighborhoods to seek out this type of process, is the recognition of a neighborhood and its history. We have recognition for much of the story of Hyde Park already in the existing district. However, tonight's discussion seeks to expand the boundaries of what the history of Hyde Park has been traditionally viewed upon, and to introduce perhaps a different element that was acknowledged in the National Register designation, but not able to be secured in the local historic designation in 1988. We heard some testimony about property values and some studies that were done on Hyde Park. There are many empirical studies done by different, usually universities, on the values of properties located in historic districts versus those of similar condition and proximity that are not regulated through local historic ordinances. And there's a strong trend that shows that these historic districts increase your property value, stabilize values, and encourage investment. Preservation incentives are expanded through local historic designations. There are some federal benefits that are activated through National Register designations. However, local historic designations also brings with them several incentives that are often taken advantage of in rehabilitation projects. The architectural review process itself, often controversial on certain levels because it does require an additional level of review for permitting, certainly is a tool that can be utilized by neighborhoods to ensure that the character of their neighborhood is maintained and preserved into the future. Architectural review, as I said, does focus on the exterior of properties, but also on the character of the neighborhood, the grid, the sidewalks, the parkways, the roadways, and the gateways. So it's not just the historic structure, but the entire framework of a neighborhood. Alleyways is a very important one that is often ignored in contemporary design. And then enhanced public participation, which I think is another attribute that I've heard from the neighborhood that is somewhat underrepresented currently. And this would place a noticing process in place in the event that a local historic district is approved that requires a public notice much in the way that this public hearing was noticed, with posted signs, mailings to surrounding property owners and to registered participating organizations that let the neighbors know about what is going on within their neighborhood. There are some of those requirements in place for land use amendments currently, whether you're in a historic district or not, but this enhanced engagement is allowed through the review of demolition requests, relocation requests, or new construction that is being introduced into an area. Also, governmental agencies and any sort of contractor that's secured for a particular project has to also receive a certificate of appropriateness for any work done in an area that's historically designated. So some of the areas that the Architecture Review Commission focuses on to ensure compatibility and the maintenance of historic integrity is done through the Certificate of Appropriateness process. That's the design review process for exterior changes. Many of those reviews are conducted administratively through my staff. Most of them are. Our boards are challenged by their current levels of review for new construction, additions, and demolitions just by themselves. So more routine requests such as trades permits, small additions, or site modifications are handled administratively. But the Certificate of Appropriateness process will deal with elements such as new construction within a historic district, significant additions, exterior alterations that essentially stray from the original character of a building. As I mentioned, relocations and then demolitions, which are heavily regulated. In addition to the certificate of appropriateness process, the Architecture Review Commission is empowered to consider variances within a historic district. So there's not a need for a property owner within a historic district to seek out dual approvals through the Variance Review Board and the Architecture Review Commission. The Architectural Review Commission can handle that all at one hearing. And elements that define historic structures, such as porticocheres and whatnot, are one of the elements that they consider when weighing the hardship for variances and the need to maintain the historic patterns of an area. And then recommendations on land use changes and rezonings. While currently that is a function that the public would be made aware of, in a local historic district, the Architecture Review Commission or the Barrio Latino Commission would make a recommendation to City Council on the appropriateness of a rezoning, a land use classification change, or a comprehensive plan amendment. So those recommendations are part of the rezoning process or land use change process, and they are required prior to any such proposal being presented to City Council. And then I mentioned preservation incentives, which are reviewed also by the Architecture Review Commission, thus kind of combining all of their authority for efficiency and expediency in the review processes. So the process that this looked a lot different on my computer screen. The process that we're considering today is multi-staged, and we've accomplished some of these steps. Of course, the application for designation has been submitted, and staff research has been conducted and outreach with the neighborhood. You see a number of the meetings that have been held, both neighborhood meetings in which the staff has participated in different settings, different locations throughout the last couple of years, somewhat interrupted by COVID. And then a number of meetings with yourselves, the HPC, where there's been updates presented to you on different boundary options and different elements of specificity with regards to an expansion. Where we're at this evening is this is the appropriate hearing for you to consider a recommendation to City Council for a possible expansion of the Hyde Park Local Historic District. That is delineated within Section 27-256 of the code. If you do choose to make that recommendation this evening, your recommendation will be forwarded to the Hillsborough County City County Planning Commission for determination of eligibility with the Tampa Comprehensive Plan. That's an administrative level review. It requires about 30 days for that to be completed. And then once that is received back from the city, there will be 2 public hearings that are scheduled at Tampa City Council to consider this request. I want to emphasize that the City Council hearings are publicly noticed in the same manner of which this evening's meeting has been noticed, and there is opportunity for public participation at that hearing. The 2 neighborhood associations you have heard from this evening. I will not spend much time other than saying that the majority of the area that we're considering is located within the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association boundaries. However, the segment of Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, you see just at the very transition from the local district into the proposed area at De Leon. One might consider, why is this expansion really that important to an existing district, which primarily compromises a large section of the existing local historic district? And I think that the answer to that has become clear in many of our local historic districts, where we see development that is of a very intensive level and degree being proposed along the boundaries of local historic districts. I've been, in my position for a long time, and I can tell you that there is a desire to develop along the edge of local historic districts to benefit from the aesthetic qualities and character of the districts, but avoiding the expectations for compatibility and form. And so I think that as you consider the request this evening, you can understand that one of the effects of expanding a local historic district such as this is it better protects the existing inventory of structures within the district boundaries. The study area that we initiated actually included much of the National Register District within the National Register boundary that's associated with the Hyde Park Historic District on the east side of the Selman Expressway. We began and reported to you at several instances of the remaining contributing buildings and the amount of demolition that has occurred within that area identified by the blue line. That does extend up towards Kennedy Boulevard from the existing boundary, and it does bridge over the Selman Expressway. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But these, as you heard from our earlier presenters, really were the original boundaries of Hyde Park. As we begin to look at the 1931 Sanborn, we see, a different image of Hyde Park, one that does not feature the Selman Expressway. And you see the density of the structures that are indicated in the 1931 footprints, the yellow footprints indicating that the structures were constructed of lumber, the more pinkish indicating brick or masonry construction, and then a few blue structures that indicate steel frame construction. Saw a lot of great pictures through the earlier presentations. I won't re-emphasize those, but there is obviously a long history, a long built history of structures within the existing and the proposed expansion area with strong architectural elements that have come to really define the character of the neighborhood and eventually led to its recognition as both a national and local historic district. What Elaine had provided for us in this map is an indication of the districts that we've been talking about this evening, but also overlaid with the Dobyville area. You see that sort of in the green boundary example that's indicated kind of crossing over the various districts. A segment of the historic Dobyville area is included within the proposed boundary, as is the Richard Doby House itself as one of the contributing structures to that district. I think Mr. Kite Powell talked a great deal, much more eloquently than I can, about the history of Dobyville. But Dobyville is a part of Hyde Park's history. It's a part of its history that is not currently well known or I think ingrained in the overall discussion of Hyde Park. And so recognizing that history and celebrating that history, making it part of the whole, I think is very important within your discussion this evening. See a number of structures within the in the Dobyville area of Hyde Park. Unfortunately, the Mount Zion AME Church was demolished, and these are the trends that we see in these areas that are unprotected, is that although historically celebrated, even through the installation of a historic marker, the structures don't enjoy protection and are easily being demolished under our current codes. Can't really have a discussion about this area without talking about the Crosstown Expressway. Much of the Crosstown Expressway had been being planned for decades through the 50s and 60s, finally being constructed in the 1970s. It was planned along the railway line that did pass through Hyde Park. In passing through, it somewhat created a definable barrier between the south portion of Hyde Park and the north portion, and we still feel the effects of that today, particularly in the Dobyville area, which was really heavily impacted by the introduction of the Crosstown Expressway. See the 1973 aerial map with our district boundaries overlaid, and you see just the, mainly the railway line, just the beginning of construction of the what is today the Selman Expressway. See, in 1975, the development is clearly underway. You saw, I think, a dramatic change in some of the scope of what that area, how that area was impacted by the demolition to create the expressway. And then moving to 1976, when it was officially opened, you see its presence, which has remained similar or actually obviously been expanded a few times over the years, but its presence is definitely a factor visually in the area that we're considering this evening. Once again, 1980, and then a more current image of how that looks today. We saw a lot of photos of the architectural styles that are within the boundary area. I won't spend too much time on this, but I do want to present it because it is part of your criteria that you'll be considering this evening. And I think when we talk about this area, we're talking about architectural styles that may be somewhat represented in the existing district, but many of which are not, or are not in the same way. And I think that's the important distinction, is we're not presenting a designation to you that is more of the same. It has uniqueness in and of itself. The areas of Dobyville present, I think, a unique attribute with some vernaculars that don't currently exist in the boundaries of the established local historic district. And then some of the ornamentation is different. We heard about Victorian structures. There's some Spanish eclectic structures. There are craftsman structures. There's kind of the Florida vernacular that we see. Commercial structures, some of which used to be single-family structures, but now have been converted into office uses or medical office. And then some of the more simple structures of the Dobyville area, the cottages and the shotgun houses that have just a unique Florida appeal, distinctive from perhaps some of the grand homes that we were looking at. 1405 West DeZiel is the Richard Doby house that is immediately abutting the Selman Expressway, and I think we're very fortunate that that was not demolished as part of that system. Some of the commercial structures within the Platt Street area and in interior to the neighborhood, there's schools and civic buildings and commercial buildings, all that intertwine to compose the historic character of Tampa's original suburb. In 1985, there was a survey done of this particular area. At that time, there were nuances. It wasn't as distinguished contributing, non-contributing. There was some altered contributing and certain distinctions that were not present in today's more formalized classification system. But at that time, generally, there were 239 contributing structures and 103 non-contributing structures that were built between the Hyde Park period of historic significance between 1886 and 1933. We're going to see some dramatic changes in those numbers, unfortunately. I think much of that has been generated through land use changes and zoning classifications that occurred sort of in the 50s and 60s that enabled multifamily development to really become the dominant zoning classification within this area. We have many structures, single-family structures, that are situated on multifamily zoning classifications, which provides an incentive for development of a more intense level than what currently exists on a single-family residence. Many times, up to several units per parcel. Additionally, there's been a number of planned development zonings that also seek to somewhat modify the existing zoning classification and allow for changes or waivers to classifications, many times for multifamily development. It's important to acknowledge that there's some historic multifamily development in the expansion area, which is something that we don't see a lot of in the established local historic district, but does form a reference for some of the, the uniqueness of this versus what we currently have represented. But what we've found, particularly through the last few years where development has intensified, is that we're seeing principally single-family residences being demolished to be replaced by multifamily developments. Here are a few of the demolitions that we've looked at in our office. Unfortunately, lacking local historic designation, we are not very successful at preventing these type of demolitions. The bar is very high for protective measure lacking local historic designation. New construction that's been introduced into the area. Here's some examples of varying forms, varying styles and uses. I think one of the benefits that the neighborhood recognizes with the architecture review process is that the character of new construction is sensitive to the historic patterns and normally seeks for compatibility. So we like to utilize and emphasize the use of perhaps the alley system as a means for vehicular access and storage, as opposed to front-loading garages, which can often be somewhat intrusive into the visual realm for the public. Kind of drilling down on the different data that we collected for this area that was principally the National Register District. North of the Crosstown Expressway, this area has been significantly impacted through redevelopment. There's some heavy institutional and significant multifamily commercial development that has occurred, significantly reducing the amount of contributing structures within that area. So early on in coordinating with this commission, we had determined it would be more appropriate to focus on the area south of the Crosstown. And so we began to study that area independently. We recognize that the area moving east of Hyde Park Avenue has been majorly impacted through redevelopment. There's only one contributing structure in that area that's indicated with the purple coloring to the right of the map. So there was a staff recommendation that that area be omitted and allowed to develop to market conditions. And then focusing on the area that we're considering this evening, the area that extends up from the existing northern boundary of the district, is bordered by the Selman Expressway on the west and the north, and extends to the east at Hyde Park Avenue. There are 101 contributing structures and 111 non-contributing structures. And I think one thing to keep in mind is we are focused on incorporation of this area into the local historic district and not the establishment of an independent local historic district. So these numbers are consistent with other districts that we have, where segments of the local historic districts have a significant quantity of contributing structures, while other areas have redeveloped to a greater extent. So in looking at the data, just to kind of place this all on one slide for your consideration, the existing Hyde Park Historic District is composed of 1,267 structures, 834 of which are contributing, 433 are non-contributing. That percentage of contributing and non-contributing is 66%. Typically in local historic district or national register districts, you look for percentages that are above 50 and preferably around 55% or higher. So I think that is a very legitimate ratio for contributing and non-contributing structures. The proposed area that we're studying this evening, the contributing structures compose 101 of the inventory, non-contributing 111, for a total of 212. Independently, that's a 48% ratio. I think that another factor that is often discussed in historic preservation is quality over quantity. So you are certainly appropriately processing this if you're considering the uniqueness of some of the structures within these areas. So the proposed combined, if these two areas were incorporated into a historic district, are that you would have 935 contributing, 544 non-contributing, for a total of 1,479 structures that are historically represented within the boundaries, and that was retaining a percentage of 63% contributing. As I said, the process that we're considering this evening is a recommendation by this commission as to the criteria that I'll review momentarily. If the criteria within section 27-256 is satisfied, for recommendation of an expansion to the district. In the case of the proposed boundaries, which are illustrated in the green box on the map, the Hyde Park Historic District, in the staff's opinion, does meet the requirements of section 27-257A1, 2, 1, 2, and 3, and 27-257B for local historic designation. The buildings constructed during the period of significance of 1886 to 1933 are represented within the expanded area, and they retain architectural integrity and are considered to be contributing resources to the historic district. In addition, the majority of the area's older houses have much of their original ambiance, and the streetscape is well maintained. The original grid system is in place, and there is a historic representation of mixed uses as well. We feel therefore that criterion 1 is satisfied. That is criterion A for the National Register in the areas of community planning and development. Because of its association with persons significant to the history of Tampa, the district meets criterion B. You heard testimony earlier about some of the individuals that were prominent in the area, and some of which I think have been discussed, but others are Sumter L. Laurie, Kate Jackson, of course, Richard Dobie, Emilio Elliott as well, in addition to James Walters, William Morrison, and O.H. Platt. The proposal also fulfills National Register criterion C, or 3, within the local code, for the variety and quality of the architecture. I think we spent some time reviewing the architectural character of the area and how that is represented through its inventory. Bounded by the Crosstown Expressway, Base Road Boulevard, Howard Avenue, the Hyde Park Historic District is geographically definable with a significant concentration of buildings from the historic period defined from 1886 to 1933, and the structures still convey their architectural integrity. Therefore, the Hyde Park Historic District meets the requirements for local historic designation within the sections of the code that I referred to. I wanted to spend a moment talking about the boundary because there's been a lot of discussion about exactly where the boundary should be situated. We considered the data if the boundary were situated on Platt Street as opposed to going all the way north to the Crosstown Expressway. In that situation, indicated in more of the yellow boundary line, would essentially extend the district boundary north from De Leon up to Platt Street, over to Boulevard, and then on the west it would remain with the Selman Expressway. There would be 85 contributing structures and 99 non-contributing structures for a total of 184 structures. I reviewed the figures for the existing composition of the district. You see what the previous proposal equated to. The revised numbers would place the proposed expansion area at a 46% ratio, but it would not affect the proposed combined percentage of 63%, so that would still be intact. I mean, one thing we certainly don't want to do is somewhat dilute the integrity of the existing district. We still want to maintain its importance and recognition as a very successful historic district. So again, those are the figures for that particular area of study. And similar to the previous recommendation, the staff still does feel that this expansion, these expanded boundaries, would meet the criteria within 27-257A and B. So for your role this evening, there are several things that you have before you. If the HPC determines that it is appropriate for the applications to be forwarded to City Council for consideration, your first chore would be to consider the staff report, the designation report, exhibits, and testimony presented at this public hearing, to determine if the proposed designation meets the criteria delineated in 27-257A and B. You have that criteria summarized in your staff report, I believe on the second page, so you can reference that through your discussion. Determine the appropriate boundary to be reflected on the local Hyde Park District Inventory Map, which we have here, of course. Determine the completeness of the designation report, specify any necessary amendments. Of course, the designation report is geared towards the original proposal of boundaries. If there were to be any type of amendment, we would need time to reflect that within the report. And then lastly, to form a motion to City Council as to whether the application should be approved. So with that, that does conclude my staff presentation. Prior to moving into public comment, I would recommend that we administer another swear-in. So anyone in the public who did not participate in the previous swear-in, if you're going to speak, if you could please stand and raise your right hand for Ms. Owen to administer the swear-in.
Anyone else speaking that has not been sworn in? Okay, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm any testimony you will be giving this evening will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Commissioners, under your rules, speakers are allowed 3 minutes to speak. If they do have a form that was provided in the lobby, they can receive additional minutes, but they do need to present that form prior to beginning their speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. So at this time, if you do have public comments, I ask that you please line up to the side. 3 minutes goes by very quickly, so please summarize your time, give your name and address as well. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for your time and service to this great community. My name is John Harden. I'm a resident of the area that is now being called Dobyville. It was not called Dobyville when I moved there. It was called Hyde Park North. Since then, a sign's been put up that says it's Dobyville, which I believe because I happen to live right across the street
Can you
from the.
please give your address?
Oh, yes. 420 South Oregon Avenue. I also previously lived at 1404 West Azeel Street, right across the street from the Adobe House. And I still own that property. I may be one of the only people in the audience tonight that have actually was there when that house, the termite riddled siding on the Adobe House was so damaged that the owner had to stucco over the whole thing. And, did that without a permit, of course, and expanded the front porch out to the, basically the edge, or expanded the house out to the edge of the front porch, and threw in a window from Home Depot, and again, stuccoed over all that. And so to call the house, the Adobe House, might be a little bit of an insult to the builder of the house. But I'll leave that. If the owner of the Adobe House would like to preserve it, she should do so. But this is a argument about property rights, and what I choose to do with my house right across the street from the Adobe House should not be infringed upon by the city council or the ARC. I don't think that any of the people that got up to speak on behalf of this has probably been in front of the ARC to make an argument on the part of building something, or say if they want to change their siding or something like that. Some of these homes, for instance, they have pine novelty siding. The reason they were all stuccoed over is because in the 90s and 80s and 2000s, when people were working on these houses, novelty pine siding, you couldn't get it. And if you did, it was forced growth yellow pine from Georgia that was just completely porous. And so it was very poor quality, and the minute you put it up, it would rot. And so that's what the ARC would have had us install in these homes. One of my is that, 30 seconds, okay. I'm gonna need to get a form and get more time, because I'm just getting started, but.
That should have been submitted at the beginning, sir.
Okay, well, that's fine. I came here open-minded. So far, I'm just not convinced. I think what we have to understand is that a vote in favor of the ARC reviewing anything that's done in our neighborhood is a vote for more expense, and it's a vote for more regulation. So with that, I'll yield, and I'll see you at the city council meeting.
Thank you for your time. Again, if you have any additional time forms, please submit that to legal so that it can be submitted to records. Thank you.
Ron Reed? Thank you.
Okay. My name is Pam Canella. I live in 604 South Orleans in my family home of 91 years and 5 generations. The residents of Hyde Park are very passionate about their neighborhood. This historic Hyde Park boundary expansion brings together the remaining puzzles or pieces of the puzzle, including Dobyville. It's about the need to preserve the historical character of this area. For residents, it's about its many walkable neighborhoods of stately mansions, shotgun and bungalow homes. Its many tree canopy-lined streets lead to a neighborhood of homes, boutiques, restaurants, and coffee shops. It's the makeup of this eclectic historical area that tourists come to visit and stay. It's the ambiance created by this collection of unique homes and historical buildings in a neighborhood that attracts people to Hyde Park and the city of Tampa, not the monumental public buildings. This is not only about historical preservation, it's about economic growth. This city's businesses, developers, and political leaders view historic preservation as an obstacle to progress and a barrier to the city's growth. rather than the economic asset that it is. Historic districts have been proven to have a positive and stabilizing effect on property value. This area brings tourists and revenue to our city by hosting special events such as Gasparilla, and it's in our Hyde Park area. This area's physical character is the connection to its historic roots, and it is what identifies Hyde Park and the city of Tampa. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rachel Radwick. I live at 1018 West Peninsular Street, and I'm here to speak to you today on behalf of the Center of Architecture and Design, Tampa Bay. I am the board president. We are a not-for-profit that's committed to the preservation and enhancement of the built environment and protecting historic resources within our community through our mission. And I'm here today to express our support for the expansion of the Hyde Park Local Historic District. And I hope that you guys understand the value and the importance of the proposal that you've heard here today, but mainly to focus on these prime reasons. First and foremost, it provides protection from demolition to historic buildings within the district, and this will in turn prevent any further destruction of the historic fabric of the neighborhood. Additionally, it provides preservation to historic buildings in the expanded district through the design review of the Tampa Architectural Review Commission, and is requiring new development, including additions, to undergo this review process through ARC as well to ensure compatibility with the historic character of the neighborhood. And most importantly, for historic property owners within the boundaries, any historically contributing property is eligible to apply for the historic ad valorem exemption under both the city and the county. Historic districts are special, and the designations is what helps keep them special. It's important for all property owners within a designated area to understand that studies have been shown that properties within historic districts increase in value and increase in value quicker than properties in undesignated areas. So as stewards of preservation in Tampa, I encourage for you guys to vote positively to continue bringing this forth to Tampa City Council. So thank you for your time this evening.
Hello, my name is Julia Gorska Freeman. I live at 1009 West Charter Street in Tampa. I am a member of the Center for Architecture and Design Tampa Bay. I am a design historian and a real estate professional. And I am coming to you today as a citizen whose family first moved here in 1988. And interestingly enough, with the date coinciding, my family arrived, the local designation happened, and it's when there was a sign that haunted me in my youth that said, Tampa, America's next great city, which always felt to me like, we hope we're gonna be good enough. We really hope we're gonna do something interesting. We're gonna tell you we're interesting, and we'll hopefully find something interesting about us that will make us show up on the map. And while I say that with humor, I implore you to complete the designation of the Hyde Park Historic District to keep what actually does make us unique and interesting. The smaller houses, the different houses, it's what's the character and the story of the city of Tampa. And as citizens of the city of Tampa, we deserve that. We deserve to be who we are and to preserve that for not only ourselves and our visitors, but the next generations who come here. We don't need to be every other suburb. We can be ourselves and be proud, and maintain our historical integrity, the visual culture, and the visual vocabulary that makes this such a unique and interesting place to live, drive, play, work. All of the above. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Angela Ducos. I live at 407 South Newport Avenue. And I wanted to share a little bit about why my husband and I still live in the neighborhood. In 1993, we purchased a bungalow. And back then, where we lived, north of Swan, south of Platte, it was a rough area. Our realtor said, well, you're in a great school district. I looked around, I'm like, we're not gonna be here that long. Well, 25 years later, we're still here. What attracted us initially was the characteristic, the charm, the history of the neighborhood. We loved the bungalow, the Spanish style houses, the shotgun houses. The longer we lived there, the much more we realized that we enjoyed all these characteristics of the charms of the homes, the front porches. We started Friday, the last Friday of every month, porch party, happy hour, so that we could meet our neighbors. A few years after living there, there was a bungalow 5 houses down that was in need of dire repair. We bought it. We took a long time to repair it, but we did, and we brought it back to life and revitalized it to add to the neighborhood. By then, we had our family of 2 grew to a family of 4. We were getting calls. It was at the height of the real estate back in 2003 from developers and realtors to sell because our house is zoned RM24. So that means they wanted to knock it down and probably build a lot more housing on that property, on our property. But we loved the neighborhood, fell in love with it. It was coming up, it was being revitalized, and we decided to raise our children and retire in that home. So for the past 20 years, 25 years, kind of more like 30 almost, we've seen a lot of growth, both good and then not so good. The empty lots that were around us, the one on Willow, 300 block on Willow, and a little south of Willow and Platte, they're now townhomes. I can't do anything about the contributing structures that have been knocked down, but I can do about saving those structures that are there. And we'd like to, and we're in favor to have it designated as a local historic district. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Leah Carden. I live at 311 South Delaware Avenue, and I am the Vice President of Hyde Park, Spanish Town Creek. Historic preservation within the Hyde Park area is one of the central mandates for all 3 of the Hyde Park neighborhood associations. With this in mind, we submitted our application to expand the local historic district up to the Salmon Expressway to secure the remaining historically contributing structures and better maintain the character of the greater Hyde Park neighborhood. We've identified and outlined a few points that we believe substantiate the validity of the local historic expansion. First, Willow Gateway is the gateway road to our greater Hyde Park neighborhood. Both residential and to a lesser extent commercial traffic use Willow as a main gateway to enter the neighborhood. Local historic expansion will be more consistent with the surrounding Hyde Park area and its historic designations, as well as the city's comprehensive plan. A portion of Hyde Park and Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek are already in the National Historic District. This is a walkable neighborhood with front-facing houses, similar to our sister neighborhood associations in the local historic district. The neighborhood is comprised of hundreds of businesses and single-family residential homes, many of a historic nature. Additionally, expansion of the local historic area aligns the neighborhood more closely with the City of Tampa's comprehensive plan. And third, the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek neighborhood is home to historic Dobyville. Dobyville was a historic black neighborhood in what is now known as Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek. It was named for Richard Doby, a resident philanthropic African-American businessman and community leader. Richard Doby helped pen the history of Dobyville and Tampa. At the turn of the 20th century, he donated multiple parcels of land for public purposes. A 1927 study found that approximately 10% of Tampa's African-American population called Dobyville home. One of the historic buildings already mentioned here tonight that still remains is the original Doby family home at 1405 Azeel Street. Richard Doby also donated the land for Dobyville School, which was demolished for construction of the Selman Expressway. He donated land for the Zion Cemetery in Tampa, thought to contain some 850 burials. The cemetery was washed away by redevelopment in the area. It would be a shame to continue to allow these homes and area to be excluded from the local designation. Please move this proposed expansion forward to City Council. Thank you so much for your time, effort, and diligence.
Good evening. I'm Patricia Somerville. I live at 2107 West Deacle Avenue in historic Hyde Park. I read a historical architecture article recently that summed up the feeling that many of us in Hyde Park have about the expansion of our local historic area to include Dobyville, a historically black neighborhood in Hyde Park. The summation was, honor history and you will impact the future. Please honor history and impact Tampa's future. I wish to submit my statement to the record.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Reese Riggle. I live at 312 South Willow Avenue. We live in a Dobyville home, and a beautiful Dobyville home that we love very much. I want to take a little bit of time tonight to talk about what this is and what this isn't. This isn't about what we can't do as individuals. This is about what we can do as a community and as a city. This qualifies. It's one of the only areas in our entire region that has the number of contributing structures still standing to qualify for preservation, and even more lucky, it has original Dobyville structures. This is a chance to preserve the most significant section of Dobyville, where the Dobyville namesake home still stands. This is recommended by experts, both credentialed city staff, credentialed architectural and historic neighborhood experts. And this is widely popular. All three neighborhood associations representing Hyde Park and also hundreds of residents who have met over multiple years and at dozens of community meetings support this. This is not NIMBY. This is yes in my backyard. People in this neighborhood want this. This is not anti-development. Every non-contributing structure can be redeveloped to the highest and best use of zoning of that property. The design just has to conform with the historic district guidelines. The Valencia, a 7-story property behind Sena Bistro, is a great example of this, and Hyde Park Village is another. This is not all about single-family homes. This section of Hyde Park is very diverse with single and multifamily residential and commercial. And this is not an impediment on property value. Studies prove that property values of all types rise in historic districts, as you've previously heard. We all own a little piece of history as a city and as individuals in this area that we are discussing tonight. And this is an opportunity for us to keep this bit of history for generations to come. Let's not let this opportunity pass us by. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Kelly. I'm a law clerk with Hillward Henderson. I'm here voicing the concerns of Ryan Sampson of 304 Willow Avenue. Mr. Sampson is not objecting at this point to the expansion of the district. He's just simply asking if you could leave his property out of that map since it is already on the edge. If you're concerned about his property's redevelopment, it is already old enough that he would have to go through these processes protecting the property in order to redevelop anyways. It's already protected in that sense. What is confounding to Mr. Sampson is the fact that it has been chosen as a contributing structure. If you go back to the 1970s, look at the aerials in the 1970s, there's a primary structure on that property that is now a parking lot. To the north, you'll see structures. Those are now parking lots. That is not the original architecture. If you look at the property itself, you go back 5 years, it's a completely different roof. It's different pillars. The structure itself is different. So it is a little concerning that this has been chosen as a contributing structure in the current proposal. And that is all for Mr. Sampson at this point.
Thank you for your time.
Good evening. My name is Susanna Fenhagen, and I may be the longest living resident in Hyde Park. I moved there in 1964.
Can you just restate your name? I'm sorry.
Yeah. My name is Susanna Fenhagen. I live at 1303 West De Leon Street. I have lived on South Dakota and on South Delaware, and I've been there for almost 60 years. I have been a part of and have seen every part of development. I was a Girl Scout leader in the old Kate Jackson house. That's been torn down. The first house I lived in on South Dakota has been torn down. We need to preserve this area. Things have changed, and yes, I've had to go before the ARC to make changes on a house. And I don't mind doing that if we can protect this tiny bit of history within this vastly changing city where every piece of land is being taken for apartment buildings. We don't have enough roadways, we don't have the drainage. There's so much that we're missing. Please preserve this little pocket for all citizens in this city. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Laura Everett. I live at 310 South Delaware Avenue. I've been a resident of the expansion area for about 15 years, and I am also professionally an urban planner. I'm a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. So I both personally and professionally support the expansion and hope that you will support it this evening. I do so for two reasons. One is to remedy the mistake that was made to leave Dobyville out of the historic district. I think that historical assets of all kinds deserve protection, whether the original inhabitants were of a different race, different income, different status levels. They all deserve the same right to protection and preservation. So I hope you will join me in that. My second reason for supporting this is the protection of the gateway that the Platt Street provides to City of Tampa. We are the gateway, one of the gateways, few gateways over the river into the city. And of course, with all the redevelopment that's happening in the Channel District, we take very seriously our role and responsibility in protecting that gateway into the city. So again, I both personally and professionally support this expansion and hope that you will join me in that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Japp. I own a, I'm sorry?
You have a number of names on the.
I have 8 on there, 7 are present, so.
So Meg, if I can see Meg, Maggie, Ben, and then Bo, all right?
He's not.
Angie, Brian, and Lorraine. Okay, so you've got them all?
I have 7 out of the 8 here, so I should get 7 extra minutes. Bo's not here. I know him, he's my son. I'm sorry, well, I'll be honest with you. I don't get Bo's time. So, my name is Michael Japp. My family and I own the property at 211 South Boulevard. Tonight, I'm actually here to submit to the record a 66-page presentation that I submitted electronically last week. I hope that'll be read into the record, okay? I'm gonna kind of go through some points I made in that. I'm gonna try to gloss over some that I made at the last hearing. But basically, I have here about 29 petitions. And these 29 petitions are all from people that own property in what I refer to as the infield. What I refer to as the infield is the area east of Willow, west of Hyde Park Boulevard, north of Platt, and south of the Selman. That is that strip of land between Platt and the Selman. Those 29 petitions are asking you to exclude that from this expansion. The reason we're asking you to exclude that is because that area has become just a natural buffer. It's completely a different environment than south of Platt, okay? And where people say that, yes, Platt is the entryway to the city of Tampa, yes, it very much is. It probably gets 100 times the traffic that you get on Swan Avenue or the places south. So we're surrounded by these area, and it's only 80 yards between Platt and the expressway. So what I'm trying to convince you tonight is Platt Street itself is more of the natural boundary between the environment south of Platt
and the entire environment north of Platte, not the Selman. And if Willow is the entryway to Hyde Park, think about when you go south on Willow, you go under the Selman. The only thing you see north of Platte there is an empty field that's owned by the Expressway Authority that'll never be developed, an entry ramp, and heavy traffic. There are no residences there. They're all south of Platte. So to me, the natural entrance to Hyde Park is Willow and Platte, okay? So I wanted to throw out a few things that I heard people citing at some of these prior meetings, the first hearing and this one, you know, specifically about how a commercial area such as Hyde Park Village has succeeded so well in spite of being part of the district. Well, it was fully developed in 1986 or 87. The district did not come into being until 1988. It's all modern construction. It was not subject to the Architectural Review Committee. So of course it's successful, okay? And so, let me see. There's an article I put in here from back in 1985 that showed all the historic properties in the area that we're discussing tonight, and plus in the existing district. There's only one historic property north of Platte. That's the Peter O'Knight home. But that property is already owned by the Tampa Historical Society. It is fully protected. There are no historical properties north of Platte in that little infield district, okay? My understanding is that the driving force behind this was the Spanish Town folks want to be part of the district. I don't blame them. But if you look at Spanish Town, it does extend all the way north to the Selman. But within that strip that I'm talking about, the infield, there's not one home that's being used currently as a single family residence. If the area is excluded, every single family resident in Spanish Town still gets what they want. If you look at Dobyville, the eastern border of Dobyville, the boundary, is Willow. If you exclude the infield, not a single residence or home or structure within Dobyville is excluded, okay? Now, also, let's look at the facts of how this whole process has worked out, okay? I draw a comparison to when New Tampa was annexed into the city of Tampa back, I think, in the 80s or 90s. I kind of remember a little bit about it because some of my friends were local politicians there. Most of the people in New Tampa wanted to be part of the city. They were part of the process of bringing themselves in, okay? The people in Spanish Town, the people in Dobyville, they want to bring themselves in. I understand that. It increases those residential property values, okay? So that's why these petitions are written in two ways. They're written to say, we support this plan if you draw the line at Platte. This would be 29 petitions in favor of that, representing something like 30 parcels in that 38 parcel area. Now, if you include that, this is 29 petitions opposed, that they're going to go to the city council. Do you want them to be opposed to this process, or do you want them to be in favor? They can be submitted as they are, and that's how they'll be read. If this plan cuts off at Platte, these are in support. If this plan cuts off at the Selman, these are opposed. So my understanding is that you as a board, as a commission, have the discretion to modify the plan at this meeting and approve whatever you choose to approve. That's your discretion. So what I'm urging you to do tonight is exercise your discretion. Take a good hard look at that area between Platte and the Selman. If it's excluded, none of the people in here that want this lose. They don't lose anything because that area north of Platte and south of the Selman is a disaster. It's already lost its character. The gentleman pointed out the rebuilding in Berlin and the rebuilding in places like that. Well, those were public lands in Berlin. And actually, I've been to Berlin. I used to live there. I've seen that building when it was the East German palace that they had. The wall was still up when I lived there. I was a child. My father was in the military. But these are not public lands. These are lands that property owners, me, and all these other 28 property owners paid for, knowing that they didn't have these architectural restrictions. If these architectural restrictions are put in place, I don't believe they will add value to those properties. I believe they will diminish the value of those properties because no one is ever going to raise a family there. No one is ever going to raise their children. And if I've been in that building 17 years now. I've owned it for 5, okay? And I have never seen anyone walking their dog north of Platt. I've never seen a baby stroller north of Platt. I've never seen anything but homeless people, interstate bridges, speeding traffic, loud, noisy traffic. I submitted a lot of pictures and, in support of this. If you look at the facts of that area, it's basically commercial, urban, whatever you want to call it. It's not residential. Then if you look at the south side of Platt, the south side of Platt is all commercial as well. But that commercial property south of Platt has created quite a buffer between Platt and the areas south. There is no buffer for the areas north of Platt. They're squeezed in between the Selman Expressway, Platt Street, then we've got 3 interstate bridges, okay, and we have heavy traffic, northbound, southbound on all 3 of those roads, Willow, Hyde Park Boulevard, and North Boulevard. We have heavy traffic all the time on Platt and on the Selman. This is not residential property. It doesn't have the Hyde Park character anymore, and because of the traffic, it cannot be restored. No one is going to move there as a single-family resident. And, I heard a lot of citations about how these district protections, or I call them restrictions from a commercial property owner standpoint, I heard a lot of comparisons of how they increase property values. I agree, they increased residential property values. And but what I don't see is when it said that they increased commercial property, I don't see how they could have increased Hyde Park. And I don't see any data cited in anything here that shows where a commercial property of the nature of what we have here, which is the infield, I don't see any data supporting that increase. There's plenty of data supporting these residences south of Tampa, a lot of hard data, and I agree with that. I'd love to live there, to be honest with you, okay? But I can't afford it, all right? So, kind of lose my train of thought here. I'm not good at this. But I would urge you, look at this. Look at these petitions. This area is a controversial issue, including this. So ask yourself, do you want to send a controversial issue to the city of Tampa, or do you want to change 30 opposed positions into 30 in favor petitions, okay? This is a no-lose if you cut it off at Platt. Nobody loses what they really want. There's just no evidence that it supports the value. And what I'd like to ask tonight is I'd like a show of hands for everyone here who is in favor of the plan as it was presented to the board by the applicants. Who's in favor of that plan? Let's see your hands. Now, if I want you to keep your hands up if you own property north of Platt. Do you own property north of Platt? Keep your hands up. If you don't own property in the infield, there you go. So this is being imposed to property owners within that strip entirely by outsiders. This is not a good process. This is, it's an overreach, and I think it's an abuse of the process. I think at the end of the day, it's fitting a round peg into a square hole. It will not fit. Please, I urge you to exclude the area north of Platt Street. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Carrie Bowling. I live at 314 South Delaware Avenue. Carrie Bowling. 314 South Delaware Avenue. First, I want to say that I can't afford to hire a lawyer. I'm just a regular person fighting for my home. I want to say that all the people that are pushing for this to happen, they all bought their homes knowing full well that they were not in a historic district. They were fine with it. And now they've changed their mind. They want it in a historic district. So they want to force everybody else to agree with them. I don't want my house included. Other people also don't want theirs included. To pass this because they want it, you're saying that their rights matter more than mine because I don't want it. And they do. I have just as many rights to my property as they do, and they count. And there's just a handful of people here, saying they want it. What about all the other people? just because they're not here doesn't mean that they want it or that it's okay. So I'm saying that my rights matter. I don't want it. Thank you.
My name's John Bowling. I live at 314 South Delaware Avenue. I've been living here for about 24 years, and I just wanted to ask a simple question to kind of illustrate a point. I actually don't own the property that I live at, but the question is it right that others dictate what I do with my own property? I don't own the property. I was just asking the question to illustrate a point.
Thank you. At this time, is there any more public comment? If not, yes.
Commissioners, I do want to take a moment. There were a number of letters that were received that also constitutes public comment. Elaine's going to review those. Some of those you have received digitally, and others were placed in your packets this evening.
Good evening, Commissioners. Elaine Lund, Historic Preservation staff. This evening, we also have several letters and the petition that you've received a copy of from one of the speakers who was before you this evening, Mr. Japp, with his 28 or 29 petitions. And additionally, we received another set of letters in opposition and letters in support of this. We will be submitting these for the record. While I'm submitting those for the record, we also have for the record to submit the staff report, the designation report, a copy of the PowerPoint that was presented by Mr. Fernandez, the building assessment forms that were part of the field survey work that was performed by staff, and additionally the map of the proposed boundary expansion.
All right. So at this time,
Can we have another motion to receive and file all documents that were just referenced by staff, please?
I make a motion to receive and accept all the documents that were given to staff.
I second that motion.
we can show a vote of hands. Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
We just have to allow her to allow rebuttal.
All right, at this time, we're gonna close we have the applicant gets 5 minutes of rebuttal if you would like to use that time now.
Thank you. I'm Pamela Jo Hatley. I represent the applicants. Just a couple of points. One, our expert witness, Mr. Rodney Kite Powell, rendered an opinion in which he said the proposed expansion area should never have been left out of the local district in the first place, and this is an opportunity to correct that. Staff has evaluated the application against the city's criteria in the Land Development Code, and that's the test that the commission must apply based on the evidence in the record. And the applicants have submitted competent substantial evidence this evening to show, and also the staff reports, the staff's evaluation shows that the proposed expansion area, the boundaries as submitted in the application, does meet, and more than meets, actually, the city's criteria in the code. Just a couple more brief points. There was a comment that there are no historic districts in the area north of, or I'm sorry, no historic structures in the area north of Platte. And if I wrote my numbers down right, I believe staff said that there were 16 contributing structures in the area north of Platte, 12 non-contributing. I could be wrong about that, but it was in the staff presentation. So I'm not sure what was meant by historic structures, but certainly there are contributing structures in that area north of Platte. And has been said over and over tonight, it would be a shame to lose those. This is an opportunity to preserve those. And the evidence in the record supports a recommendation of approval to City Council. And then just in closing, there were a couple of comments about property rights. And indeed, we Americans are staunch defenders of our property rights. And our Constitution ensures a certain property rights. But our courts have also decided for many, many years in consistent decisions that local governments can put reasonable restrictions on property rights. And so this is what we're talking about tonight, reasonable restrictions that benefit the public interest for this community and that preserve the historic character of this community and the history of our city for all citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we will be closing public comments. The commission will be discussing the topic at hand. Thank you. At this time, commissioners, do you have any questions for staff?
No. Well, do you have questions? Are there questions? I mean, you didn't close the public hearing.
At this time, we're going to close the public hearing.
No. You just asked if there were questions of staff. Does any of the commissioners have questions of staff or the applicant?
No.
You have to turn on your microphone.
I have a question for staff.
We'll have to allow the applicant to have a rebuttal since there are questions at this point.
I just have the question, Dennis, about the contributing and non-contributing charts, because there was, I don't know if you included the little top part, because the numbers, there were different sets of numbers that I saw. That's it. Yeah, that was it, really. Because I know you said at the end that it all rounded out to 63, but there were two different proposed.
Are you asking about the area that's represented on the map?
Yeah, but it was like in the PowerPoint presentation.
Well, I presented two different scenarios with two different boundaries. I can go through those.
Oh, yeah, that was my question, the two different scenarios.
I go to the Elmo. So the numbers on your screens currently represent the existing Hyde Park Historic District, and then the data collected for the boundaries represented on the map that's on the easel, which extend all the way north of Platte to the Crosstown Expressway.
Okay.
And in that scenario, there would be 101 contributing structures added and 111 non-contributing structures added, for a total of 212 structures. And that constitutes a 48% contributing percentage ratio. The total combined is illustrated on the column on the right, which would be the existing district plus the proposed area calculated to the total. Okay. I presented the same scenario if the boundary were left at the center line of Platte instead of extending all the way to the crosstown. So obviously the amount of structures diminish, both contributing and non-contributing. Here we're looking at 85 contributing and 99 non-contributing for a total of 184 structures, reducing that percentage down to 46. And then cumulatively, the amount of structures would be less, but the percentage of contributing and non-contributing would remain the same.
A related question, could you show that map that had the sub-areas colored, please?
For the proposed boundary?
Yes, it was the map that had the three different types of
Right.
terms.
Is that the map you're referring to?
Is it possible to enlarge it just a bit?
actually it is, now that I.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Slow.
So this one is, the green area is,
Is north of the Crosstown,
right,
this area. This is the
Right.
Crosstown, the Selman Crosstown Expressway.
Okay.
This is the area north that extends to Kennedy.
right?
This area in the tan color is the proposed area that's indicated on the larger map. And this was an excluded area that is to the east of Hyde Park Avenue. Through one of our previous conversations at one of the previous HPC hearings, it was determined to omit that area.
Thank you.
We're omitting the area in the top green, right?
Yes,
Oh.
the proposed area as it is represented on the map is this tan color, which is the existing boundary line on the south of the district up to the Crosstown Expressway on the north. On the west, it is the boundary of the Selman Expressway, and on the east, it is Hyde Park Avenue.
Are there any more questions for staff? At this time, we will close the public hearing.
No, we have to allow for the applicant to have a rebuttal. That's
My
okay.
apologies, I'm wrapping
It's
up.
okay, it's okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Applicant to have an opportunity to,
If you have, if Kamaria Pettis Malcolm from the City Attorney's Office, since the commission had questions of staff, this is your time if you want to have a rebuttal
Okay.
to any of the information that was just discussed.
thank you, I have nothing, thank you.
Now, yep.
At this time, we will close the public part of the hearing and open it up for the commissioners to discuss. Thank you.
I just have a question for Ms. Pettis-Mackle, and that is, because two things. One, I came in late, so if I need to disclose, no conflicts or whatever. I have no conflicts or ex parte, I just wanted to
Okay.
clarify that. And then I had a question about the labeling of the criteria, the section number.
Kamaria Pettis Malcolm from the City Attorney's Office. So I provided the commissioners a sample motion. The sample motion that I provided outlines the criteria that's established in the code that's also listed in your staff report. The code section that explains the criteria is 27257, and it's A, 1, and 2, and it's also 27257B, 1, and 2. The staff report outlines those code sections. I've just provided it again in the sample motion, and it's up to the commission to determine what, if this application meets the criteria, what elements or what specific code section or subsections this application meets based upon the evidence that was heard at this hearing and submitted into the record. So this that I provided, the sample motion, is what's outlined in your staff report. It's up to the commission to decide what criteria they believe, if any, this application meets.
Okay. It's on the, how did that IIIs of section 257A2, that's what, I just got confused because in the code it has the II.
So if you look on page, if you look on page 1 of your staff report and recommendation, it correlates to what your sample motion is. It's the same,
Okay.
this
It
the
just said-
same information, it's just numbered, it may be numbered different, it's the same data,
It's the same
information.
words. I see
Same
that.
words.
I just wanted to clarify so
Same
that we,
words.
whichever way we go, we make the right motion. Because in the code, it's not A, B, C, D, E.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay. I just want to make
It's the
sure
same
I
information,
say
though.
the right one.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, I would like to say, at this time, I do appreciate all of the entities that came together to make, to bring us here today. The research from staff, the research from businesses, all who were opposed or for it. I appreciate you coming out tonight because one, this is the middle of a day, so I appreciate everyone coming tonight. Whatever happens today, we know that everyone has given their time to make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of what's going on. And I think Mr. Fernandez last year opened it back up to neighborhoods and businesses to discuss what is important to them. So thank you for bringing this back to us so that we can have a resolve as we move forward. So thank you. At this time, could I have a motion from the commission to expound on this?
Yes, I would like to make a motion. HPC 2021-04, number 1, move to recommend to City Council approve the request to expand the Hyde Park Historic District boundary as proposed because the application meets the criteria established in City of Tampa Code Section 27-257 for the following reasons. 27-257, parens A, parens 1, and parens 2, A, B, C, and D. 27-257, parens B, parens 1 and 2, F and G.
This time.
Can you
Do you
provide?
need me to read each one of them, or?
Can you read, and I believe you were talking, referencing criteria A, criteria B, and criteria C, and
And D.
criteria D.
Correct.
Just provide additional basis for your justification for the motion, why you're,
Yes, I can. That wouldn't be part of my motion, that's sort of commentary. Am I,
She didn't actually mention the criteria D, she left off E.
I left E off.
okay.
Yeah, I do have my reasons.
Okay.
I can give those first and then repeat the motion. Would that be better?
If you just want to start your motion all over, that's fine.
So I'm going to give us just a little editorial, which is, I believe the expansion will capture the unique architectural characteristics, but most importantly, the expansion will protect the history of the neighborhood, which was omitted when the local boundaries were established 34 years ago. I have to get my readers on, I can't even read my own writing. Portions of the proposed expansion area are non-contributing, we know that. But the local designation will ensure that the new development will be compatible with the historic district. And I believe that we have seen examples of what happens outside of the historic district when development is not compatible to the historic district. There are many, many examples, and hopefully by moving this boundary, we'll be able to, of course, we can't correct what's already done, but maybe remedy what will happen in the future. Now I'm gonna go to my motion. I move to recommend the City Council approve the request to expand the Hyde Park Historic District boundary as proposed because the application meets the criteria established in City of Tampa Code Section 25-257 for the following reasons. A, the district was constructed or achieved its significance during the period of historic significance as delineated in the National Register of Historic Places, guidelines, or as established in the nomination pursuant to those guidelines, and the properties associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history, also known as Criterion A. Properties associated with the lives of people significant in our past, also known as Criteria B. Property embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or represents the work of a master, or possesses high artistic value, or represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components lack individual distinction, criterion C. In addition, section 27-257, parens B, parens 1, and parens 2. The district has a character as a geographically definable area possessing a significant concentration of buildings which are well-designed and other structures, sites, and objects, all of which are united by past events or by a plan or physical development, or the district has a character as established and geographically definable neighborhood united by culture, architectural styles, or physical development.
I second.
May we have a show of hands who is in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? At this time, it's moved unanimously to approve the request for the city. Thank you.
So Commissioners, just a little housekeeping. We do have another meeting scheduled for September 13th, 2022 at 9 a.m. Staff is determining if that meeting is going to be necessary. We will let you know if that does need to occur. Under new business, I have no new business unless any of the Commissioners wish to raise an issue.
No, not at this time.
Then the meeting can be adjourned.
Okay. The time is 8:06 p.m. and the historic preservation has been adjourned. Thank you for your time.